Good morning, everyone. Today, I want to remind you of a truth that carries us through life's toughest tossings. God won't let you break, no matter what you're facing, no matter how heavy the burden feels. His grace is sufficient, and His strength is made perfect in your weakness. You see, life can sometimes feel overwhelming. There are seasons when the pressure seems unbearable. It might be the weight of a broken relationship, the strain of financial trouble, or the ache of unanswered prayers. And in those moments, it's easy to wonder, how much more can I take? God will never let you be tested beyond what you can handle. And that truth is a cornerstone of faith. Life brings challenges so intense that they feel overwhelming. We've all faced moments where we wonder if we can bear one more day, one more conversation, or even one more hour of the pressure. But God's word assures us that He knows exactly where our limits are, and He will never let the burden grow so heavy that it crushes us. It's easy to feel alone in these moments, to believe that the struggle is ours to face entirely on our own. But the truth is, God is fully aware of every detail of our situation. He sees not just what we're going through, but how it's impacting us. He knows how tired we feel, how stretched we are, and how close we think we are to breaking. And yet, even in the middle of it, He says, I will not let you fall. I will not let this overwhelm you. This doesn't mean life will be easy or that challenges will disappear instantly. What it means is that God has already made a way for us to endure and overcome whatever we face. He is faithful to His promises, and one of those promises is that no temptation or trial will ever be too much for us to bear. It's not just about our strength, it's about His strength working in us. The same power that raised Jesus from the dead is at work in you, empowering you to face and endure your trials. When you feel like you've hit your limit, that's often when God shows up in ways you never expected. He sends encouragement through a friend, gives clarity through His word, or brings peace that surpasses understanding. Sometimes He doesn't remove the challenge, but gives you the strength to rise above it. Other times He opens a door, a way out that you didn't see before. Whatever the case, His timing is always perfect, and His provision is always enough. Think of it this way: God doesn't allow challenges to destroy you. He allows them to develop you. He knows exactly how much weight you can carry, and He uses that pressure to strengthen your faith, build your character, and prepare you for greater things. Much like refining gold, the process may involve heat and discomfort, but the result is something purer, stronger, and more valuable. Remember, God's understanding of your limits is far greater than your own. We often think we can't handle another step, but He sees the reserves of strength and resilience He's placed within us. When we lean into Him, we discover we are capable of far more than we imagined, not because of who we are, but because of who He is. So when the pressure feels too much, trust that God is still in control. He knows you, He loves you, and He's walking with you every step of the way. You are never alone in your trials, and no challenge will ever surpass the grace and strength He provides to carry you through. Life is full of pressures, some of which can feel so intense that they threaten to break us. It might be a financial burden, the loss of a loved one, relational difficulties, or personal challenges that just seem to keep piling up. In those moments, we often feel like we're being crushed under the weight of it all. But in reality, God's purpose in allowing pressure is not to destroy us, it's to shape us. Think about the process of refining something precious. Like gold itself doesn't change, it's the intense heat and pressure that purify and mold it into something even more beautiful. In the same way, God uses the pressure we experience to shape us into the person He intends us to be. The pressure doesn't define us, it refines us. It may hurt in the moment, but its purpose is to bring out something better, something more Christ-like within us. The Bible tells us that God is the potter and we are the clay. Just as a potter carefully and intimately applies pressure to form a piece of clay into a vessel in our lives, shaping us through our circumstances. Every trial, every difficulty, and every setback is an opportunity for God to mold us into His likeness. He doesn't apply pressure to destroy us, but to build in us the quality that will make us stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. This doesn't mean that the process is easy. Just like a potter doesn't rush through the shaping of the clay, God doesn't rush through the molding of our hearts. The process may take time, and it may be uncomfortable. It may feel as though the pressure is too much to bear, but God is never absent during those moments. He's carefully overseeing the process, making sure that each challenge has a purpose. It's important to remember that the pressure we face isn't always a sign that we're doing something wrong. In fact, sometimes it's the sign that we're being prepared for something greater. Think about the way athletes train for a competition. They intentionally put themselves through physical stress in order to build strength and endurance. The pressure they face isn't something they seek to avoid. It's something they embrace because they know it will make them better. In the same way, God uses the pressures of life to build our spiritual endurance and deepen our faith. There is another profound truth here. God knows exactly how much pressure we can handle. Just like a potter knows when to stop applying pressure to the clay, God knows when we've been stretched to our limits. And when we've reached that point, He is there to provide rest, comfort, and the strength to keep going. His wisdom far exceeds ours. He knows the right amount of pressure to apply to help us grow without breaking us. In fact, the most beautiful transformations often come from the greatest pressures. The butterfly doesn't emerge from the cocoon without struggle. The struggle is what strengthens its wings. The tree doesn't grow strong roots without the storms that test it. And we too grow stronger and more resilient through the challenges we face. Each time we face a trial and trust God to carry us through, we come out on the other side more mature, more compassionate, and more prepared for whatever God has next for us. So when life's pressures seem overwhelming, remember that they are not meant to break you. They are meant to shape you into the person God created you to be. Lean into Him during those moments. Trust that He is using the pressure for your good, and know that when you come through the other side, you will be more refined, more resilient, and more equipped to walk in the destiny He has prepared for you. When life feels overwhelming and you're at your weakest, it's easy to feel like you're completely alone or that you lack the strength to keep moving forward. But the truth is this: God's strength is made perfect in your weakness. In fact, it is often in those moments when you feel you have nothing left to give that God steps in and reveals just how powerful His grace truly is. Human strength has its limits. We can try our hardest to push through difficult situations, rely on our own abilities, and hold everything together. But eventually, we all reach a point where our efforts aren't enough. That's not a failure, it's a reminder that we were never meant to carry life's burdens on our own. We were created to depend on God. And it's in those moments of complete surrender, when we acknowledge our inability, that His strength takes over. Paul, in 2 Corinthians 12:9, writes about this reality when he says, "But He said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness.'" Think about that. God's power isn't made perfect when we're strong or when we have everything figured out. It's made perfect in the moments when we feel like we're falling apart. Why? Because in those moments, we stop trying to rely on our own strength and allow God to work through us. God doesn't expect us to be strong all the time. He doesn't ask us to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. Instead, He invites us to come to Him with our burdens, our fears, and our weaknesses. Jesus Himself said in Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." That's His promise to meet us right where we are and to provide the strength we need to keep going. It's important to realize that God's strength doesn't always come in the form of dramatic changes or instant fixes. Sometimes His strength looks like peace in the middle of chaos. Sometimes it's the ability to take one more step when you thought you couldn't go on. Sometimes it's the wisdom to make a decision you've been struggling with. And sometimes it's simply the assurance that you're not alone, that He is walking with you every step of the way. God's strength is not just about getting through tough times, it's about transformation. When we allow Him to work through our weakness, He changes us. He builds resilience, deepens our faith, and teaches us to trust Him in ways we never would have otherwise. The very situations that seem to drain us become the moments where His power is displayed most clearly. Look at the stories of people in the Bible who found themselves at the end of their strength. David, faced with overwhelming odds, cried out to God and found the strength to defeat Goliath. Elijah, exhausted and feeling hopeless, found renewed purpose when God spoke to him in a gentle whisper. Peter, after denying Jesus 3 times, was restored and became a bold leader of the early church. In each of these situations, human weakness was the starting point for God's power to shine through. When you're weak, you're not a failure, you're human. And your weakness is not the end of the story, it's the place where God begins to show His greatness. His grace doesn't just cover your weakness, it transforms it into a testimony of His strength and faithfulness. So, if you're feeling weary or overwhelmed, don't try to fight through it alone. Let God's strength sustain you. Lean on Him. And watch how His power works in ways you could never imagine. You may feel weak, but with God, you are never defeated. His strength will always carry you through. Setbacks can feel like detours, delays, or even dead ends. When we encounter disappointment or hardship, it's natural to wonder if we've gone off course or if God's plan for our lives has somehow been derailed. But here's the incredible truth. What we often see as setbacks are actually setups for something far greater than we can imagine. In God's hands, every challenge, every disappointment, and every trial has a purpose that He is weaving into a larger, beautiful picture for your life. One of the most striking examples of this is the story of Joseph in the Bible. Joseph, the beloved son of Jacob, had big dreams. He saw visions of greatness and knew that God had a plan for his life. But soon, his life took a dramatic turn. He was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. To an outsider, it might have seemed like Joseph's life was a series of setbacks, one after another, with no end in sight. But Joseph's story didn't end in the pit or the prison. Each of those moments of adversity was actually a step in God's plan to prepare him for something greater. The betrayal by his brothers led him to Egypt. The false accusations and imprisonment brought him into the presence of Pharaoh. And because Joseph remained faithful, God raised him up to become a leader in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. He not only saved the nation from famine, but also reconciled with his family. In the end, Joseph declared to his brothers, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good, to bring about this present result." Genesis 50:20. Same God who worked in Joseph's life is at work in yours. The setbacks you're facing right now may feel overwhelming, even unfair. But remember, God's perspective is so much greater than ours. We see the present moment. He sees the whole story. We focus on the closed door, but He sees the new door that's about to open. Nothing you're going through is wasted. Every challenge is an opportunity for God to work in your life and through your life for His glory. Sometimes setbacks are God's way of protecting us from something that isn't good for us. Other times, they're His way of redirecting us to something better. And often, they're His way of refining us, building our character, strengthening our faith, and teaching us to rely on Him more fully. Think about it. If Joseph had never been sold into slavery, he would never have gone to Egypt. If he had never been falsely accused, he wouldn't have ended up in prison where he interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. And if he hadn't been in Egypt, countless lives might have been lost during the famine. What seemed like an endless string of setbacks was actually a carefully orchestrated plan to position Joseph exactly where he needed to be. Your story is no different. The setbacks you're experiencing might just be God's way of setting you up for something beyond your imagination. Maybe He's building patience in you because He knows you'll need it for the road ahead. Maybe He's closing a door because there's a greater opportunity waiting just around the corner. Or maybe He's allowing you to walk through a challenging season so that you can later encourage and help someone else who's walking through the same thing. Trust that God is always at work, even when you can't see it. He's never idle, and He never abandons His children. Every setback is a setup for Him to show His power, His faithfulness, and His goodness in your life. So instead of being discouraged by the setbacks, ask God what He's teaching you through them. Stay faithful, stay hopeful, and trust that He's working all things together for your good. Remember, in God's hands, nothing is wasted, and no setback is ever final. It's just a prelude to His greater plan. In life, it's easy to let our problems consume us. When challenges arise, they can feel so overwhelming that they dominate our thoughts and emotions. We focus on what's wrong, what's lacking, and what's impossible, until the problem itself seems bigger than anything else, including God. But here's the truth. What you focus on determines your perspective, and your perspective shapes how you navigate life. That's why it's crucial to shift your focus away from the problem, fix your eyes on God. When you focus on your problems, you magnify them. They begin to feel insurmountable, and you start to believe there's no way out. The fear, worry, and anxiety that come from dwelling on challenges can be paralyzing. It's like staring at a mountain and convincing yourself it's too steep to climb, too big to overcome. But God calls us to a different perspective. Instead of staring at the mountain, He invites us to look at Him, the creator of the heavens and the earth, the one who has the power to move mountains. Psalm 121, 1-2 says, I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. This passage reminds us to lift our gaze, to stop focusing on what seems impossible, and start focusing on the one who makes all things possible. God is bigger than any problem you'll ever face. No matter how overwhelming the situation feels, it's never too big for Him to handle. Think about the story of Peter walking on water. When Jesus called Peter to step out of the boat, Peter had the courage to take that first step. As long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, he did the impossible, he walked on water. But the moment he shifted his focus to the wind and the waves, fear took over, and he began to sink. That's a powerful reminder for us. The storms of life will come, but if we keep our focus on Jesus, we can rise above them. The moment we let the storms capture our attention, we start to sink under their weight. Focusing on God doesn't mean ignoring your problems or pretending they don't exist. It means seeing them in the right perspective. It's acknowledging that, yes, the problem is real, but God is greater. It's choosing to trust His promises over your fears and to believe that He's working all things together for your good, even when you can't see how. When you fix your eyes on God, you begin to see your circumstances differently. You start to realize that your struggles are temporary, but His power is eternal. You understand that He's not just aware of your situation, He's actively involved in it. He's making a way where there seems solutions you haven't even thought of and orchestrating events for your ultimate good. Focusing on God also brings peace. Philippians 4:6-7 reminds us, do not be anxious, do not be impatient. By prayer, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. When we shift our focus from the problem to the one who holds the solution, we find a peace that doesn't make sense, a peace that steadies us even in the middle of the storm. So how do you focus on God? You do it through prayer, by bringing your worries and concerns to Him and trusting Him with them. You do it by meditating on His word, filling your mind with His promises instead of your fears. You do it by worshiping, even when you don't feel like it, because worship shifts your perspective from earth to heaven. Whatever you're facing today, choose to focus on God. Let Him be bigger than your problem. Trust that He's already working behind the scenes and rest in the assurance that He's in control. The storm may rage around you, but when your eyes are on Him, you'll find the strength to keep walking step by step until you reach the other side. One of the most comforting truths about God is that He is always with us no matter what we go through. Life has its share of difficulties, and there are seasons where it feels like everything is falling apart. In those moments, we often wonder if God has forgotten us or if He's distant. But the truth is, God has never left your side, and He never will. His presence is constant, unchanging, and faithful, even when you can't feel it. God's word is filled with promises of His presence. In Deuteronomy 31:6, Moses tells the Israelites, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. That promise wasn't just for them, it's for us too. No matter what you're facing, God is walking with you through it. He's not watching from a distance. He's right there beside you, guiding, protecting, and comforting you every step of the way. When you face challenges that feel overwhelming, it's easy to let fear and doubt creep in. The enemy wants you to believe you're alone, that no one understands what you're going through, and that even God has abandoned you. But those are lies. God's presence isn't dependent on your feelings or circumstances. Even when you can't see Him or sense Him, He is there working behind the scenes for your good. Think about the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. They were thrown into an impossible situation, one that seemed destined to end in destruction. But God didn't leave them to face it alone. When King Nebuchadnezzar looked into the furnace, he saw not 3 men, but 4. And he said, "The fourth looks like a son of the gods." Daniel 3:25. That fourth figure was God's presence with them in the fire, protecting them and bringing them through unharmed. The same God who was with them in the furnace is with you in whatever fire you're facing today. God's presence doesn't mean you won't face trials, it means you won't face them alone. He never promised a life without difficulties, but he did promise to be with us through them. In Isaiah 43:2, he says, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze." Notice that he says when, not if. Challenges are part of life, but so is his faithful presence. Knowing that God is with you changes everything. It gives you the courage to keep going when you feel like giving up. It brings peace to your heart, even in the midst of chaos. It reminds you that you are not defined by your circumstances, but by his love and faithfulness. You may not always understand why you're going through a particular trial, but you can trust that he is walking with you, holding you up, and working everything together for your good. God's presence is also a source of comfort. When you're weary, he gives you rest. When you're brokenhearted, he draws near. Psalm 34:18 tells us, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." He's not just with you in a general sense, he's intimately aware of your pain and actively comforting you in it. How can you stay aware of God's presence? Through prayer. You can talk to him at any moment, sharing your thoughts, fears, and hopes. Through his word, you can be reminded of his promises and his faithfulness. Through worship, you can draw close to him and experience his peace. And through quiet moments of reflection, you can sense his gentle reassurance that he is with you. No matter how dark the situation may seem, you are never alone. God is with you in the valley, on the mountaintop, and everywhere in between. His presence is a constant reminder that you are loved, protected, and held in the palm of his hand. Trust that he is with you now and always, and let that truth give you the strength to face whatever comes your way. In life, challenges are inevitable, that despair is not. Through every trial, every setback, and every moment of weakness, God's presence, power, and promises remain steadfast. He will never let you break, even when you feel like you're at your limit. Instead, he strengthens you, uplifts you, and carries you to what you cannot endure on your own. When life seems overwhelming, remember that your weakness is not the end, it's the beginning of his power. The setbacks you face are not defeats, but divine setups for something greater. And when you shift your focus from the size of your problems to the greatness of your God, you begin to see his hand moving, his peace sustaining you, and his grace transforming even the hardest seasons into testimonies of his faithfulness. Above all, know that you are never alone. God is with you, walking beside you in the fire, through the storm, and in the quiet moments of doubt. His love never fails, his strength never falters, and his promises never return empty. So no matter what you're going through today, take heart. Trust in the one who holds you, strengthens you, and assures you that you will not be broken. With God on your side, you are never defeated, you are victorious.